Story 1. The Haunted Apartment. While most of this unfolded when I was an infant, it really started back late in my mother's pregnancy. My parents had been married for 2 years, and they were still living with my grandmother. It was kind of hard finding an apartment where they were. Then one day, my mother was approached by a woman who had heard that my parents were looking for an apartment. Obviously, my parents were delighted, especially when they discovered that it was near the shop where my mother worked, and the rent was really cheap. The woman and her family lived on the ground floor, and they rented the top half of the house out. Everything was fine until just after I was born. And that's when the strange things started happening. Slowly at first, in a way that made my mother think that she was just overtired from having a newborn. She must have just imagined turning off the tap, only to find it still on later. Lights that she was sure she turned off, mysteriously switching themselves on again. It must be her imagination. She must be too tired. Both my parents were very level-headed, and they ignored these happenings until they reached a point they could not be ignored anymore. The first thing that really scared them was the lights coming on in their room in the middle of the night when they were both in bed asleep. My father then heard footsteps on the narrow staircase leading down to the ground floor outside of their room. When he opened the door, there was of course no one there. He tried to dismiss this at first, blaming it on my mother's mischievous brother, who denied playing a prank. Actually, still to this day, he denies ever trying to play a prank on them regarding this house. However, events took a sinister turn, which made the other incidents up until that point fall into place. Things reached an almost unbearable level of disturbance. With the lights and my incessant crying, I never seemed to settle in that house. Although I'd be fine at my grandmother's or any other house. Footsteps and other strange noises. And then one night, which turned out to be the very last night my parents would stay in this house, something truly awful happened. I woke up about midnight for a feeding, and both of my parents were awake. My father was watching my mother feed me. As my mother looked at me, she screamed in absolute horror and then fell back on the bed, faint. She dropped me to the bed. My father was shocked. He picked me up and thought I was dead. He said I looked deathly pale. My eyes were rolled back in my head. He said my neck was bent in a way that almost made it look like my neck was broken. Not knowing what to do for his new infant child, he tried to revive my mother, who came around quickly. As she did so, they both heard me gasp and scream. The color came back to my cheeks, and I appeared unhurt, but very shocked and distressed. My mother, sobbing incoherently, managed to tell my father that she was not staying another night in this house. They both left immediately, leaving their clothes and possessions, and they went to my grandmother's house. As if this was not bad enough, some months later, when talking to someone who knew the family who rented my parents' house, they were told that a man had actually committed suicide by hanging himself in that top floor apartment. And the family had found it very difficult to rent that top floor to anyone who actually knew them. So my parents think that's why that woman approached them. Story 2. Night Encounters. I never really put much stock into ghost stories. In fact, I consider myself very stable and mature. I'm a professional. I'm a 35-year-old father of 3. But this started 5 years ago. My wife had to move out of state for several months. Her company had relocated. She was sent to help establish the business in a new state. During the 9 months that she was away, I felt as if someone was in the bedroom with me. It was an overpowering feeling. I would talk with my wife each night by phone and tell her about the strange feelings. She thought I was just not used to sleeping alone and was spooked. Several times I could feel the bed moving and the pressure pushing down on spots in the bed. On nights when our then 5-year-old daughter wanted to sleep in our bed, the thing would not be there. Truth be told, I was always relieved when one of my children wanted to sleep in our bed. I couldn't believe a grown man was afraid to sleep by himself. When my wife's duty was over and she came back home, the hauntings stopped. That is until recently. Last week, my wife, sister-in-law, and children went on a camping trip. I, unfortunately, could not go due to business. On the second night they were away, I felt the base of my bed depress, and the covers press up tight against me. I laid still thinking that I was going crazy. This could not be happening. I kept telling myself, this is not happening. Stop it, this is not happening. But it kept touching me, very gently pressing my calves and inner thighs. I rolled over to my side and pulled the covers up tight against me, still determined that this was not happening. And then I felt the strong pressure on my hips. At that point, I flew out of the bed, ran out of the room, and spent the remainder of the night sleeping on the couch. Of course, the next morning I told my wife about it, and I think she somewhat believed me. A few more days of the trip happened, and nothing happened. Until the last night. I went to bed late, around 3 a.m. I had just got into bed when I felt the pressure at the base of the bed. I felt it crawl up me on all fours and then hug me. I felt an immense pressure as it hugged me. And then it kissed my cheek. I don't know what or why this is happening, but I wish it would stop. I want to be able to sleep alone in my own house. Story 3. The Cemetery Ghost Attack. I'm a college student, and I'm going to graduate soon. For my last spring break, a group of friends and I decided to take a road trip. Our first overnight stop was in Colorado, in the hometown of one of our friends. My friend told us about this cemetery that was supposed to be haunted by evil spirits in their town. Apparently, a black cloud could be seen moving around the cemetery. Feeling brave and wanting to do some cool ghost things on our trip, we grabbed a Polaroid camera and headed to the cemetery around 10 p.m. On a night with a new moon. The cemetery was on top of a hill. A steep hill, with a rickety old fence around it. The path to the gate was steep, but an easy climb. We entered the cemetery and started snapping pics. It was a small cemetery, with small headstones at the heads of mounds of rocks, which covered all the graves. There were 3 very large cast iron headstones at the back of the cemetery. One of the headstones had some eerie scratches on it, like something had gouged into the iron. But the iron was smooth. We started getting scared and decided to leave. I was the first one to the gate. When I started down the path, I felt something pushing me. It felt like someone had their hand on my lower back. But the closest friend was 5 feet behind me. The pressure increased, and then I felt scratches. I fell down the path, stumbled to the car, my friends frantically trying to catch up with me. Later, I had the friend who had suggested we go to the cemetery check my back. And there were scratches exactly where I had felt them pop up. The scratches exactly matched the scratches on the headstone. I intend to eventually go back to that cemetery during the day and get a better look at that headstone. Maybe take a better camera this time. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Bye.